Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'll wait until the attendee list is loading, until it finishes. Okay, I think we can start. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Arman from ChangePoint EMEA Support. Thank you for joining us today. This is the third of our Tech Talk series. Today we will be demonstrating the intelligent forms capabilities with the custom examples of how you can guide users with the process flows, create custom user interfaces, and automate document generation. Let me say a few words on Tech Talks before we start. We plan to do Tech Talks on different subjects, different topics to provide information on new features introduced by patches or service packs or new releases, to share best practices for both new and existing features, and share other product news. We believe Tech Talks will provide a valuable opportunity to get real-time answers from the experts, so please do not hesitate to ask questions. We may not be able to answer all the questions during this session, but I will post the questions and the answers in the community. The session is being recorded as well, and the recording will also be available for download. Everyone is muted at the moment during the presentation, but you can type your questions from the question or chat window. We will try to answer all questions at the end of the session, once we finish after about an hour. As I said, don't worry if you don't get the answer now, you will find them in the community. We will also send a very short survey after this webinar. I would appreciate if you could fill in that survey and help us determine the next topic and help us figure how we can get better at this. Also, please do not hesitate to post your thoughts and ideas on the Tech Talk page in the community. So let's start with the agenda. I will try to summarize the business value and benefits of using intelligent form capabilities of ChangePoint. Then Roberto will demonstrate these capabilities using various custom form examples. Note that these are not the standard forms that come with ChangePoint. If you need information on the standard forms, please contact your customer success manager for further information. Also, if you need this capability to be available for you, if you have questions on how to obtain or install, your customer success manager is the best person to contact for information. Intelligent forms is a critical component as ChangePoint drives to deliver next generation professional services automation. This significant capability is an important enhancement for any company that's driving their digitization and business transformation agenda. The key values here are the ability to improve end user experience and adoption with easy to use purpose-built forms, streamlining business processes, improving data integrity with built-in process intelligence, business rules and validation, increasing efficiency and productivity by minimizing the error or rework to be done by the user, producing multiple documents in seconds, for example. There are already 7 standard forms, form templates available as a framework for you. But today we will not talk about the standard forms. We will talk about what you can do further by customizing these available templates. And now you will see the examples of all these to be presented by Roberto Vallabrega. He's joining us from UK. Roberto.
Thank you, Herman. Good morning, afternoon, all. My name is Roberto. I'm a solution consultant at ChangePoint, and I have been developing many intelligent forms myself in the last couple of years. During the next about 55 minutes now, I will walk you through some examples and discuss the main capability of ChangePoint intelligent forms. I will talk about first of all, intelligent forms, how it allows you to create custom interfaces to critical business processes without need for customizations, how to use iForms to build views for bulk editing and creation of entities in ChangePoint, how to use iForms to build grids for importing and exporting data from and to ChangePoint. And we will also talk about the ability to build wizard-driven forms to guide users through performing certain specific actions in ChangePoint. And we'll see some application of the technology to automatically generate documents based on templates and in any format. This could be Word, PowerPoint, PDF, Excel, and even custom extensions. Okay, so I'll move on to a live demo. And the first form you see on screen is actually a navigation form through ChangePoint. So what I'm doing here, I have built a custom user interface, and here you see in the 3 columns the main entities of the application. So you have your customers, contracts or engagement, existing, and all your existing projects. As I select a customer, I can either type ahead or use the drop down. Let's say I want to type ahead and go to my MovieBank customer. As soon as a customer is selected, then I have the actions. So this is the same as the action menus that you have on the profile page of the entity, in this case, the customer. However, you can also extend this by adding and linking forms to each other. So beside the normal actions that are ChangePoint actions, such as attach a document to this customer record, I can create a new opportunity. Where the create new opportunity in this specific example is not the standard interface of ChangePoint. So I've done a link between the navigation form and the new opportunity form, which is an alternative way of creating opportunity, which is with a simplified user interface in this example. So I'm going to go back to the original form. The same when I select a customer, let's say an engagement, pardon me. Let's say I want to go to my master contract agreement for MovieBank. And every time I select an item here, an entity, it will apply filters. So these are the projects that belong to this customer only. So as soon as I select the customer, again, I have the action menu available to me. The first form I want to talk about, and if we go back to that introduction, this was one of the main capability, is the creation of an engagement. So through the creation of the engagement, I want to show one of the capability, which is the ability to build a form that allows you to guide the user through a certain process. So don't give too much attention to the specific case, because this applies to different objects in the application, to different entities. In this case, we're going to create a customer, a contact for that customer, an engagement, and a project, and even a task and an assignment, all using a form. So through a single flow, I can, in this case, build, create multiple entities in ChangePoint. So let's say I'm not a user that is experienced with the application. So I know that I need to create a project or an engagement. I don't know about the data dependencies. I don't know that in order to have a project, I need to have an engagement in place first, because projects are underneath the engagement. So the first thing I'm asked is, I'm asked questions. So the first thing is, what do you want to do in terms of, do you want to select a company, an existing company you create the engagement for, or you want to create a new one on the fly? If I say I want to select an existing one, then I'm able to plug in directly into the database and show the existing companies I have access to. If I want to create a new company or account, I will click on new. I will say this is company X. And I can pre-populate as much as I want here. This is also important. So beside the standard fields, you can pre-populate and you can add custom fields. The fact that you can pre-populate is also important, because in ChangePoint you might have sometimes fields that are mandatory and you cannot hide in the standard enterprise. So that adds complexity to the user interface. What this form is doing is using some custom fields when needed, but also defaulting the mandatory field in the background in case I don't want to expose those fields to the user. So I'm going to create a new contact as well. I'll call it Roberto Val, and the email is let's say at example.com. Okay, then I move to the next step, and this is where the flow comes into place. So I'm following a wizard-driven process. The next step is to create the engagement. In fact, the form has not created the customer yet. It will do everything at the end when I press the submit button. For now, what I'm doing is I'm going to give this a name. So I call this engagement X. And again, this is pre-populated. Now, this is defaulted. The billing type is defaulted to mix fixed fees and time and material. As you know, we can have a hybrid engagement where we, on the same projects that are underneath engagement, we support a mix of fixed fees and time and material. But if I say, and there is a tab here to add the fixed fees. If I say this is not a fixed fee and time material, this is time material only, then the tab disappears. So I can create logics in the form, and based on those logics, I can show or hide certain sections of the form or pages in this case. So next, I want to add the fixed fee. I have pre-populated this. Let's say fixed fee 1 and fixed fee 2. And then I'm asked if I want to create a project. So I can exit the form here, in which case it will create for me the customer, the contact, and the engagement. Or I can say I actually want to create the project at the same time for this newly created engagement. And then when I start next, this is the page where I create the project with all the relevant information. And again, I can default and hide some fields. And normally I wouldn't do it properly, but just for the purpose of this demo, instead of using the project worksheet, I'm going to create a task just to show how we can create multiple entities at the same time. So I'm going to say task 01 for 20 hours. And I want to go further. I want to go and create an assignment to this task. Okay, so this is a type ahead field in this case. I place here hours. Okay, I don't want to create milestones. And when I press submit, what do I expect? I expect the form to create the customer, the contact, the engagement, and also the the project and the task and the assignments in one go for me. So this is based in the API. It's leveraging the API, but we'll talk more about this. Through the iForm, I can leverage both the API as well as use store procedures, whether they are standard store procedure or custom store procedures. So now the form is running, taking some time because it's creating multiple records at the same time. And then I can define the redirect page. So in this case, I'm sending the user back to the newly created engagement. And as you can see for this engagement, I have the contact, I have the account, obviously, and also the project I have just created. If I go to the project and then I open the project planning worksheet, I will see that I also have one task with one assignment for this project. So this is the task, and the person who I have assigned is here is Ann Harper. Okay, so this the next so this is an example of process intelligence. The next form I want to show is related to a different capability, which is the ability to generate documents automatically based on a template, as well as the ability to import, export data to a grid. So next form I want to show is the creation of a SAO. So I'm going to call back that master service agreement, and I'm going to launch from here the create SAO form. Now, everything you see today is an example. Those forms can be configured. I wouldn't say customized because we're talking about configuration here. There is no customization involved. The form can be changed based on specific needs to support specific process. So I'm not suggesting this is the way you operate. It is just an example. So what we are doing here is we're creating a SAO for an existing engagement. We are collecting some information on the scope, and here I added the ability to pull items from the product catalog, from ChangePoint product catalog. If I want, I can add additional items. So let's say this SAO is for Cognos 11 as well as ChangePoint 2017 Service Pack 1. Next is the creation of the scope boundary or the capability functionality metric. So this is where you go ahead and say functionality X is in scope or out of scope or is for a future phase. But what I can do here is to import, because here I have a grid, and every time I have a grid in an iForm, I can import data from a CSV file. So I should have a CSV file on my desktop. And this will pre-populate for me this grid, okay? In this specific example, what we are going to do with this grid, we are going to use this in the output document, but the same concept applies to other forms where you're not generating a document. Maybe you are importing requests. You want to bulk import from a file request items or even project in line items. So it applies to different entities, the same concept. Okay, so I'm going to move, probably I'm going to pre-populate this, at least the first 3 items, so we can show it on the resulting document. And then we move to the next step, which is where we can add additional content. So what we can do here is we're creating a SAO. We can expose fragments or pieces of documents or entire documents to the user from a library, and the user can say, I want to add the travel policy for this SAO. You can build in some intelligence here. So let's say you have different policies regarding some aspects for different customers, then you can build this form in a way that will only show the relevant documents here. So this will be added as a paragraph in the output document of my SAO. The next step is about the responsibility. Okay, there is a bit of Latin here, so my spell checker is saying that there are mistakes. So here is where you add the responsibility for the service provider, the responsibility for the customer, and then the pricing. And this section is important because what we do here is we plug directly into the database and we pull in the rates from the engagement. So in this case, we are going to use the negotiated rates that are on the engagement record. So I can add maybe a couple of line items here. Okay, and then when I'm done, what I'm going to do is I can optionally store this document in ChangePoint in the database, in which case will be linked to the engagement record, or I can just leave this blank, and on the next page, what I see is a download page where I can download the document. For the purpose of this example, I have created two templates, so the document is available both in as a Word file and as a PDF. I will open the PDF just to show the result. So it is based on a template that can be easily changed. The skills to change the template, as long as you don't touch the tags that are in the template, are the same skills to change a Word document, basically. So you can apply any formatting here. This is pulling information from the engagement record. The day is the day of today. We have some text that is in the template itself, but then we have the scope boundary that we have added with the first three items populated. So I scroll down. I have the responsibilities that were also part of the form. I have the travel policy. So this is the paragraph that was added from an external document, an external source, and now it's part of the cell. I have the fixed fee and payment schedules in this section. I have the payment section, I would say. Okay, so what we did here is we have a form, which is a custom form. We are generating documents, and those documents can contain both data coming, information coming from user entries, as well as I can retrieve informations such as the rate cards in this case that are stored in the database to produce this document. Still another example of document generation. So let me close this. Going to, this time I want to open an invoice. Actually, before I want to show a quote, go back to the navigation menu. In this case, I'm going to select a project. And beside a number of actions that are standard ChangePoint actions here, I have created this form to include a link to the quotation form, which is a custom developed form as well. So I want to generate a quote for this project. This is going to be based on the project budget. So I want to show the budget first. So in this budget, I have, you can tell from the summary, but if we move to the budget sections, we have components of the budget for the services. So this is a time and material project. I think it's a mixed one, actually. We have the fixed fees, we have products, we have expenses. So what I'm going to do here, and I have different revisions of the budget. So I have revision 1, revision 0, and these are my quote type revisions. As you know, in ChangePoint, there are different approaches to quoting. I've done this for a customer who needed to quote from the project. So they have already the project in place when they create the quote, because they have the plan in place, which they use to generate the costs and the budget, and then they use the quoting budget to actually generate the quoting, the quotation. So I'll go back to the form and select the fixed fee implementation, fixed access implementation again, and I'm going to create the quote. This process is much quicker. So all I'm going to do is to select the revision. You see, as I change the revision, the totals are recalculated, because it's very fast, because I'm just taking data from the database. So the speed is the one of an SQL query, basically. Okay, so I have an option as well here to store the output document in the project in this case. But in this case, I'm not going to. So I'm just going to select revision and generate the quote. Again, two different outputs for this example. And here I have, again, a document that is based on a template, retrieving information from the database. So there is the customer, the main contact for the customer prepared by is the logged user, the date, the revision number that we're using. And then there is a staffing plan and the hourly rates. And this is interesting because we are mixing, as you know, the budget represents those line items as line items, and there is no graphical graphical representation of the WBS. Here we have the WBS, so those are in fact the task. It's a simple project. If you had indentation, you would see this task indented as well. Here we have a summary of the fixed fee deliverables. We have the blended rates, so the form is performing, beside creating the document, is performing some calculation. In this case, I'm calculating the blended rate simply as the amount of the task divided by the hours. I have the recap, the summary of the services component. I have these expenses, and finally a summary of my services. So it is just a simple example again, but it is to understand the options that you have when you generate documents automatically. You can have forms where you have the intervention of the users, or form like this one that simply retrieve information from the database and create the document automatically. The next thing I want to talk about is the risk register. So I'm going to go back to my navigation menu, and I'm going to show some examples of bulk edit views. So I'm going to select again my fixed asset implementation project, and this time I'm going to launch, I call this project risk register. In fact, I just want to show the concept because for now this is just risk register, but you could extend this to add additional tabs to show issues, to show change requests, or even custom requests. So this would become a register of different project events or project objects. In this case, what I'm doing here is I'm just reusing. So behind this, there is the standard element, standard object, which is the risk. Let me show this on a separate tab. So this is the standard risk that contains a number of custom fields, user-defined fields. So what I'm doing here is I have displayed those risks as line items. So the fields are now displayed in line. So I have a mix of standard fields as well as custom fields. For example, I have the impact, which is a drop-down, is a custom field. I have the response, which is also custom for this form. So I have created the UDF in the system administration. So what I'm doing is simply to display this in line in order to create a grid. And once I have a grid in place, as we mentioned before, we have the ability to import or export this to from a CSV file. Additionally, what I can do here is I can bulk edit. So let's say this is, I'm going to call this updated. And I can also create new line items. Okay. So the way Intelligent Forms works, I'm not creating items unless I press the submit button. So when I press submit, this form will trigger the API, and it will trigger a call to the API for an update of an existing risk, passing in the risk ID. And then it will also trigger another call for the creation of the new line item based on conditions, because this does not have the this line does not have the risk ID. Oh, forgot to. Okay, it gives me the option to talk about validation. Beside the standard change point validation, you can add additional validation in the form, which is nice to have, because you really have plenty of flexibility. So you can build complex validation rules based on logics between the fields that are selected, for example. So in this case, the form is just complaining because it wants me to select values for those fields. Okay, and then option, I can update, attach knowledge item to the risk as well from here. So when I click submit, again, what I expect is that there is a line item risk that is updated, and there is a new one that is also created all at the same time. Okay, and here I have my new risk, and here I have the updated risk. So now let's start to combine capabilities and concepts we have seen so far. So we talk about what we just talked about now. So the ability to create a grid to bulk edit or create items, whether those items are risk or issues or change requests or even projects, any type of entity in change point. I shouldn't say any, actually. The limitation you have is given by the API. So if it's not reachable through the API, then there is still, you still have options because you could develop a stored procedure. But yes, I shouldn't say any. If you're interested, we can provide obviously a list of the entities and the actions that are available through intelligent forms. So next, what I want to do is putting things together. So we talk about the ability to create a view and bulk edit, and we talk about the ability to generate documents. So if I check this box, generate audit report, when I press submit, what this is doing for me is taking a snapshot of the risk register, and in this case, it's storing that document in the knowledge item section of my project. So I have, this is an old one. I have the one that is just created, which is my risk audit report. And this is this time is based on an Excel template. And it is exactly the same view, okay? And this template is customizable. So here we should have the new risk and the just updated risk as well. Okay, next form I want to show is related to a similar concept. Many of you might have my managed purchase orders in ChangePoint. You normally would do through requests and products. There are options. It's a designing decision. But I also built a form. It's a simple form. We can build more complex ones to create a user interface to store purchase orders, so headers and line items in the system in a simple way, using a resource request. Using a request. So behind there is the same object you've just seen for the risk register. Behind there is a request with custom fields. So we are hiding most of the fields. We are using the UDFs we need, but then the layout is a nice fresh layout that you get. So I'm going to go to an existing engagement, and I want to talk about something else as I launch this. There are different ways of launching, making an iForm available in ChangePoint. The first way we saw was through the navigation menu, so I can link iForms to each other, and I can even pass in parameters. When I launch the iForm can have some parameters that I'm passing in when I link iForms to each other. So a flow could be composed of different forms that I cascade, and every time I exit a form and I launch a new one, I also pass in some parameters to the next form. You can also append the iForm to the action menu. So in this case, I have my purchase orders iForm, and you can also have iForms from the top menu. So we'll see an example later on. This is true both for the enterprise menu and also for the administration menu. Okay, there is more actually. I'll talk more about that later. But you can have forms in dashlets as well, in the standard ChangePoint portlets embedded in a portlets. Okay, let me launch this form for the purchase order management from the engagement. So what I'm doing here, I'm using engagement level request to create purchase orders. And again, the form is intelligent because there are already existing items. Then it shows select the PO number. But then from the beginning, I have this menu, which is not mimic change point menu, but it is actually a menu that belongs to the form itself. So I can create a new form, for example, here, and we'll do it in a second. So when I select an existing purchase order, this is the purchase order with the header information, with some tracking on the history, when it was created by who, when it was updated, and the same level of control I can have on the single line items. Because as I said, what we're using here, any line item here is simply a change point request with some UDFs. Okay. So as you know, we can, from the database, we can retrieve any sort of information, and the information related to the creation of this line item and the modification is in the database, so I can expose it in the form. I can do some calculation, and again, this I can either use change point calculation, or I can do the calculation in the form on the fly as I change. We'll see this changing in that case. So I have existing forms, existing purchase orders available here. If I want to create a new one, I just click on New, and I can give this any, let's call this PO 0008. You can have validation in place. You can have this pre-populated, okay, based on logic. So the PO number, depending on what you want to do, but I would say this is not standard because you're getting a PO from the customer. So we call this PO 08. Select the issue date, which is defaulted to today's date, but I can obviously change. Then I say create new PO. And from here, the form is creating the first line item, which also in this example contains the header information. And then from here, I'm going to populate the line items. So I can say this PO is for Cognos for the price of, just making up a price here, 3,000. And it is, 5 quantities, no quantities recognized yet. Then I click on this button, which is recurrent, as you see in the design, standard design of the iForm. So this button gives me the ability of duplicating a line or adding a new line. The line item is defaulted, but I can change it. So let's say I want to add. So here I'm pulling in data from the change point product catalog again. And this is a matter of how you design this. If you want to use the price, the cost amount that is in the product catalog, you can do so, obviously. So I'll say that's 200, and this is 20. And then when I'm ready, I will say update the PO. This will update the line items for me, and then should be able to see the, when this was modified, as well as the updated on and the calculation real time. I want to this time change the header. So this is called now PO9. I made a mistake, and the issue date was actually not the 28th of November, it was the 27th. Then I will update. Okay. I can cancel. So if I cancel, I go back to where I was. So if I say create new and then cancel, then I will go back to the PO just created. If I say delete, I can either delete line items one by one. Okay, I can delete the entire PO. When I close, I'm back to the engagement from where I launched the intelligent forms. So it's just about the design. You have plenty of flexibility, and we're just playing for the purpose of this demo with requests. So we're using requests to store information, in this case related to the purchase order and its line items, but we can do more complex. We can create more complex forms as well. Okay, the next one is related to improving, enhancing also the back end of the application, so the administration menu in this case. So I built a simple form to bulk edit, to manage skills in ChangePoint. As you know, skills, if you want to add a skill or modify an existing skill in the in ChangePoint, you need to do it one by one. What you can do, and this applies to different items, is to create a view like this one that allows you, to select quickly the skills that you want to delete, make changes to other skills, and maybe as part of the same operation, even creating new skills. Okay. Again, in this case, the subject is the skill. Before it was the request, but you can play with this and use different entities of ChangePoint. Again, we have the standard arrows here to export, import. So if you want to bulk import skills, for example, from an external system, you can do so directly from here. Okay, so we covered this. The next thing I want to talk about is the ability to add a form to a portlet. So if I go back to my own page, I've added a portlet. It's a big one in this case, but think about the concept. So if I go back to the navigation menu, think about a user which have some restriction. So maybe for that user, the portlet would be just this block, this third column, because they can just manage projects. So they have either this list or a sub some items from this list to perform some actions on the project, and then this becomes a widget, so you can use that as a portlet or widget in your standard ChangePoint dashboards. Okay, so in this case, this is quite a big one. Just need one for an example. So I'm using the create customer form, which is again an alternative interface to create a new customer. And we use this as part of another form when we created the engagement and the project. Now, other thing that you are able to do through iForm, and this is particularly important, I love this functionality because it gives you a lot of flexibility, is the ability to create small web apps, I would say, web-based apps. So take this form, for example. Once you design a form based on the design concept that allows you to use the same form in different devices, what you can do is to create, to open that form on a mobile device. I'll show this using a slide. So that's exactly the same form. When I am on a mobile device, I'm prompt to log in. So permissions is obviously still in place. If I cannot create the customer, this example is for the customer, it could be a request, for example. If I cannot do it through the standard device, I cannot do it through the mobile either. But the important point here is that we are using adaptable design. So this form, the same form, without any additional effort in the development, it will just resign automatically based on the size of the screen. So this is an example on a mobile device, on a cell phone, and this is an example in both in landscape and portrait on a tablet. Okay, it's always the same form on different devices, so it gives me the ability to create small web-based apps. So I'll let you I'll leave to you think about the opportunities you have by doing so, but I think it's an important capability. Okay, just doing check on time. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the actually I need the slides. So the next thing I want to talk about is the moving to a more technical side, because it's a question we would get for sure. What are the skills required to design an iForm? So this is the Intelligent Form Designer tool. There are actually two versions of it. There is a web version, which is what you can see on screen, where you can see the layout of your form as you design and make changes to it. And then there is also uh, there is also a client version. Client version, it means that it is available to you to download to your desktop. Intelligent forms technology, it's, I would say, a no coding or at least low coding technology. So the person building the form would mainly drag and drop the objects that you see on the left column of the designer tool and configure those objects. So those are elements such as text boxes, radio boxes, drop downs, and so on. In terms of skills required to develop the iForms, first of all, I would say training on the designer tool that can also be self-learned through practice, and that is it worked for me. That was the case for me. You also need a basic concept of a web page, so not necessarily HTML or CSS programming, but I would say at least a basic understanding of a web page, understanding what a page is, what a section is, what columns are, etc. Basic database knowledge, as you would be pulling data directly from the change point tables and view. And yes, it is possible to query external sources through iForms as well. And list, however, I would say most importantly, this is really important. You need to have some knowledge of the of change point in terms of the processes and data relationships. This is because you are adding a layer, user interface, and leveraging the API or store procedure to perform some actions in the system. But you certainly want to make sure that you don't break any logics of the change point application itself. Because the intelligent forms also allows you to use stored procedures, the advanced level, I would say, is where you leverage custom store procs to do more complex things at the database level. So in that case, the iForm become a way to easily giving those store procedure a nice user interface. But again, it is not a required skills. It is if you want to do something more complex that is not possible through the API. Okay, with that, over to you, Herman. I know there is something you want to talk about still on the technical side, and then we will open for questions.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Roberto. There are a couple of questions that we will answer. Let me quickly mention two small and easy to use pages that will help hosted customers when developing forms. We have a log viewer page that can be installed on the hosted environments. Roberto, if you can show, yeah, that's the page. This page will allow intelligent forms developers to access two log tables in the Infinity database. That's change point connector log and event log tables, without having to have direct access to the database or database server. So if you're developing a form, when you have an error, you will need to see the details, and in order to do that, you need to have access to the database or log a hosted request and ask for the log content. And when you have this page installed in the hosted environment, all you need to do is to query the log via the page to see the details. So the output can be filtered, and as you can see, you can filter with keywords and easily spot the errors or inconsistencies, like request code 861 was missing. There was no value for it at 1216. So if you have an error at 1216 when you were testing, that is probably the likely cause for the error. There's also an API log viewer, which looks similar to this one, except that it will show the content of the API log files. So when you use intelligent forms, some of the errors are also logged in the API log files, as your forms will use API to access change point database. These log viewers are not part of the ChangePoint product. They're not supported, they're not certified, but they help our hosted customers to develop and troubleshoot their forms or API projects. If you want them to be installed, you can create a hosted request for your dev or test or production environments. A separate hosted request is required for each environment. And that will be the end, and we'll start with the questions. Now I will go in the order of questions. Well, I think we'll be able to answer all the questions, hopefully. If not, as I said, I'll post the answers and questions in community, and the recording will be available as well. So let's start it. Looks like we have renamed engagement to contract in the first form. Roberto, I think this was a renaming of the engagement, but it's just a label. I think it's not really the page
Yes,
content. Yeah.
thank you. It is a good question, actually. I should have mentioned. So what you do when you design a form, you use data from the database, but then you relabel everything. You can relabel pretty much everything. So that's actually quite good if you want to use your internal terminology. I've been on site with some customers or even non-customer, and they ask me, "Oh, what's an engagement?" Because in our terminology, an engagement is something different. So we had to agree on what was an engagement, what was in contract. So it's a good question. You can relabel everything that you place in the form, whether this is a system field, whether it's the name of an entity, such in this case, or also if it's obviously a user-defined custom field.
All right. Thank you for this, for clarifying this. And another question, can the pre-populated dates be invisible, or should they always appear? This is a question from Helge. And
I don't know if that's specific to a form that we have
that,
demoed, but in general, yes, you
that was about
can.
create project form, I believe. Create project, create tasks and assignments when you were doing the demo.
Yes, you can pre-populate any field, and again, whether it's a custom field or it's a system field, and that's one of the big advantages of using the iForm, because you can pre-populate and in some cases even hide fields, even if they are mandatory fields in the system, because you are actually giving the field a value, but you're doing it in the background.
All right, thank you. Another question, can you use the forms to edit existing records or just to create new records? I believe we can do both, as we have seen
Yes,
during the
we
demo.
can do both, and we've seen a couple of examples. So if you think about the risk register we have seen, probably it was really quick, but what I did there was I created a new line item where that new line item represents a request in ChangePoint. There is a request behind, that's the object that we're using, but then I updated an existing one, and that's the power of those grids that I show a couple of examples actually, where you have the ability to bulk edit existing elements. The same you can do if you're not using a grid, obviously. So the creation of an engagement, for example, in that case we were creating, but you could easily have the same form that allows you to display the existing engagement still with the same layout that we presented, and allows you to make changes still with obviously validation in place, because we're not going to allow through the iForm to do what is not allowed to do in ChangePoint.
All right. And when saving an output document, where is it stored as a knowledge item? Well, is it always stored as a knowledge item, or is it just you don't have to store it as a knowledge item, do you?
No, that's a good question. So I actually showed a couple of examples. So when I did it for the risk register, we created a risk audit report. It was stored as a knowledge item. In other cases, and that's down to the way the form is designed, you can either by default send the user to a prompt page to download the document, in which case it is not stored in the change point database. But you can also have a checkbox, as I show, to allow the user to decide what to do. Do I want to store it, or maybe I'm just testing the output document because before I actually store it in the entity, whether the entity is the engagement or the project.
Mhm. All right. Now, how many forms were shown in this demo? Well, quite a bit.
That's a good question. So we've shown uh, a number of, and I've been playing with iForms for a couple of years now, so I've developed a number of iForms. The important thing to clarify, I think it's important, Herman, is as
Yeah.
you mentioned before, we haven't shown any standard forms. We actually show some variants, okay, some forms that were modified, but we didn't show standard forms. So in addition to what you've seen, there are also the change point standard forms. When you design, I would say, sometimes you would start from scratch, but often once you have a number of forms available and you build your designing skills, you would start from an existing form because you want to reuse part of that form or some concept that you are using that form.
Mhm. All right. Another interesting question. Is it possible to configure iForms to enter service and non-labor items, etc., for the budgets?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? Is it possible to configure
Is it
forms?
possible to configure iForms or design a form that is for the budget, like entering service and non-labor items instead of using the grid interface
Uh,
or the budget dialog?
yeah, the answer is partially because so we did see an example where we were, printing a form. We were
Yes.
creating an output based on budget line item. In that case, we are, taking data that are in the database and exposing data to a template and generate the output form. However, if you want to make changes to the budget, and that's, as you probably know, is a very complex part of
Yes.
the application. You could not do it initially unless you use store procedures, custom store procedures. But initially, you do not do it through the standard intelligent forms because the budget line items, some of the action, they're not in the API itself.
Yeah. I would say it's not a good idea to use fully custom stored procedures for this because budget is a complex matter. Yeah. So another question, if we're not on a hosted environment, are the log files available? Yes, the log files are on the server already. What I have demonstrated is just a log viewer. It's an ASP page which would take the information from the log files or the log tables and show it to you. If you're in a hosted environment, you don't have access to the servers. So either you create a hosted request to get the logs or use the log viewers. And how do you access log viewer? A login and password that you will provide is saved in the config file. So you will need to enter or use this login and password to be able to use the log page. So on-premise environments, the logs are there. The API logs are in the API logs folder, and the connector log and event log are tables in the Infinity database already. So, I'm going through the questions. Is it possible to get a link in a workflow step to let a user create a form? Oh, for a workflow step. I am not sure if that is possible, but Roberto?
I haven't done it before. A bit of research and development. I think it's a very good idea. I would say potentially yes, but it is not standard. With the link,
Yeah.
maybe important to mention, every time you launch a form, as you know, because you are within change point, you need to pass in the session number as well as the user ID or even the entity ID if you are performing some actions on the entity.
But maybe it's possible to get a link to the workflow step, like we have in the workflow reminders page. But this would be again, this would require some custom work. It's not available in the standard forms, certainly. So there's a question about auditing. Who approved the purchase order and ability to submit a report created from ChangePoint directly to the internal audit team?
Well, if you're talking about approvals, then we're talking about the workflow, so it's not the
it's
iForm
again
itself.
workflow.
Yeah. In terms of auditing the form itself, then it's the all the auditing elements that we have already available in the ChangePoint database.
All right. Where to download iForms development and so on. Yeah, for all the questions about how to obtain or install the iForms, any questions on licensing, pricing, how these forms can be available for you, your customer success manager is the person to contact for information. And so I'm going to skip the questions on these and try to cover the technical side. Is it possible to reload an item from CSV that already exists in ChangePoint? I think you've shown a CSV example already.
Yes,
So,
that is possible. We can import a CSV file as well as export a CSV file from the iForm once a grid is in place. Herman, just to check on time, because I think we have a couple of minutes over.
Yes, it is. Okay. For the rest of the questions, I will go through all the questions and provide the answers in the community page and the page where we announced the Tech Talk. Also, the recording will be available there. And if you have any further questions, you can actually post your questions to the community, to the Tech Talk page, and yeah, we'll continue from there. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you.
That was
Thank
great,
you.
and thank you, everyone. Well, let me remind you, we will send a very short survey after this webinar. I would appreciate if you can help us in that, filling it in, and well, talk to you in the next Tech Talk. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you.